Hello and welcome to Finder's first Insights video of 2021. Well, last year was a dramatic year to say the least. We had COVID-19 come in and wreak havoc with global economies, with most stock markets crashing dramatically and then recovering pretty significantly. The Australian housing market doing something similar, and international travel basically restricted indefinitely. What impact will these three things have on 2021? We asked both leading economists and the Australian public for their predictions for 2021. We're going to discuss them in this video. In Finder, we survey two different groups of individuals every single month. We survey economists as part of our RBA cash rate survey, and we also survey the Australian public as part of our consumer sentiment tracker. In December, we decided to ask both groups the same set of questions, their predictions for the Australian economy and other metrics in Australia in 2021. In this video, we'll go through the results and the differences between the experts and the public. Well, the first thing we wanted to ask about was recession. Clearly, we've seen a recession in Australia in 2020 due to COVID-19. We then saw GDP bounce slightly to 3.3% in the third quarter. So Australia technically entered and exited recession in 2020. So we asked both groups, what is the likelihood of Australia staying out of recession for all of 2021? And interestingly, every single economist we asked, 100% of those people said they expect Australia to stay out of recession all of this year. When we asked the public, that was only 69%. Interestingly, a difference here between the experts and the public in terms of the perception of risk for this year. Why is that? I'd be interested to see your comments below. We also asked both groups about the potential for the Australian housing market in 2021. Now, 2020 was a bit of a dramatic year for the housing market. We saw prices dip before they recovered in the third quarter. We saw $16 billion borrowed around October, which is the highest amount ever borrowed in any single month for property in Australia. So it definitely bounced back, but prices on average still are not quite where they were in 2019. So we asked both groups, is this likely to happen? Economists, again, were more positive, with 86% of economists saying they expect prices to increase above 2019 levels and stay there in 2021, whereas there's only 66% for the Australian public. We also asked both groups about the potential for an increase in mortgage default. So a mortgage default is when a borrower cannot pay back the mortgage and the bank has to help them or defer payments. We saw this increase earlier in the year, but then some government stimulus came in and helped people in that situation. We asked both groups, what are the chances of mortgage defaults increasing in 2021? And again, more pessimism in the public. 76% of the Australian public said they expect these numbers to increase, and it was only about a quarter of economists. This is coming hot on the heels of a release from APRA saying that actually mortgage defaults are decreasing in Australia and the trend seems to be heading in a downward direction. So it seems like the experts are correct in this case. When we asked both groups about the potential for the stock market, we got very different results as well. We asked both groups, what are the chances of the ASX 200 increasing above 7,180, which is the peak that it was at before the COVID crash. Now, it's heading generally in that direction, but what are the chances of it exceeding that this year? Well, again, more positivity among the economists. We saw 88% of economists say they expect the ASX to fully recover, and only about 60% of the Australian public. We also asked both groups about the unemployment rate in Australia. Now, this is interesting because this is where we saw the biggest difference between the experts and the public. We asked, what is the chance of the unemployment rate increasing above 10%? Now, we saw it hit 7.5, then drop back. It looked bad when things were falling apart and then things recovered. We asked both groups, and 80% of the Australian public said they expect the employment rate to increase above 10% in 2021. This was only 3% of economists. So a huge difference here in terms of optimism and pessimism between these two groups. So we also asked both groups about the potential of a negative cash rate in Australia in 2021. This is the last economic question we're going to discuss here. Now, the cash rate is set by the central bank and determines what banks in Australia pay to borrow money. It determines how much your home loan costs you and how much you make on your savings account. A negative cash rate would flip the traditional roles of these two, and it would mean that if you had savings, for example, rather than earning interest, it could potentially cost you interest. When we asked about this, we saw nearly half of the public, 47%, say they expect a negative cash rate in Australia in 2021. This was only 7% when we asked economists. And then finally, in terms of international travel, we asked both groups what's the chance of borders opening up in 2021. When we asked about domestic borders and when we asked about Australia and New Zealand borders, the results were pretty similar. We saw about 90% of both groups said they expect those to open, but there was a big difference when we asked about international borders. About a third of Australians expected international borders to fully open by the end of 2021. This was only about 14% of economists. In reality, the federal government's policy of keeping the borders airtight or nearly airtight has proved pretty successful, with Australia handling coronavirus better than most countries, and it's unlikely that we're going to see this change in 2021. So there you have a handful of predictions. We actually asked 16 different things. So we also asked about the future of bricks and mortar retail. We also asked about the rolling out of the COVID-19 vaccine. If you're interested in more of these results, if you're interested in more predictions from the public and economists, you can check out Finder's Insights blog, which is linked in the description below. In the meantime, keep an eye on finder.com.au for all your economic news.